Mr. President, we don't use the Congressional Review Act often. In fact, I think we've only used it once successfully. But the regulators are working at a breakneck pace, and the overreach we see in this rule and some others that are coming out right now, I think really requires the Congress to pay attention, requires us to revisit the reason that the Congress gave itself the ability to look at rules and regulations and see if they make sense. Simply put, on this regulation, the Federal Communications Commission lacked the legal standing to produce the order that I think we're debating today. The net neutrality order of the FCC enacted is not based on the facts or on the law. And in fact, I have yet to hear a credible defense of why we'd want to have this massive regulatory burden. In fact, we've talked about net neutrality for several years now, and the definition continues to change because the free marketplace has driven the innovation beyond every debate we've had. The marketplace where people invest and grow the internet and access to that internet has meant that as soon as a debate would be engaged on this issue of so-called net neutrality, it no longer mattered. And I think that's what we see here as well, but it will begin to matter if we begin to manage the internet in a way that slows down investment, that slows down innovation. 3 years ago, the FCC attempted to reach far beyond any legislative mandate they had to regulate internet through a rule. Last year, a federal court struck down that rule, saying the commission had no authority to do so. Now we find ourselves debating a measure which, in a roundabout way, attempts to accomplish the same end with a result that might be disguised in some other way. The commission is using a provision of the Communications Act, which was enacted to allow the FCC to, quote, remove barriers to infrastructure investment. Now, why would we want to do that? Why would we want to remove barriers to infrastructure investment? Obviously, why would we have passed that law? Because we want to encourage infrastructure investment by removing barriers. The basis that the FCC is using was actually deregulatory, not regulatory. They're basing this on a law that said they could do something 180 degrees different than what this rule would do. Repeated government economic analysis have reached the same conclusion. There is no concentration. There are no abuses of market power in the broadband space. And even if they were, we have a lot of laws to deal with that. We have antitrust laws, we have consumer protection laws. There are plenty of ways to approach that if it happens, but nobody thinks it's happening. The commission, like many other federal agencies, has often been put in a position where one industry is competitors being asked for a regulation that somehow would benefit them in their competition with somebody else. This order would greatly increase the frequency of those requests. This order puts the FCC in a position of constantly having to monitor new innovations in the internet. One of the FCC commissioners who didn't agree with this order clearly laid out the dissent when he said this, and this is a quote from Commissioner McDowell. Using these new rules as a weapon, politically favored companies will be able to pressure 3 political appointees to regulate their rivals to gain competitive advantages. Litigation will supplant innovation. Instead of investing in tomorrow's technologies, precious capital will be diverted to pay lawyers' fees. The era of internet regulatory arbitrage has dawned, and to say that today's rules don't regulate the internet is like saying that regulating highway on-ramps, off-ramps, and the pavement doesn't equate to regulating the highway itself. In releasing the net neutrality order, the FCC charted itself on a collision course with the legislative branch, as well as with the federal judiciary, which has already struck down a similar attempt to regulate this sector by the FCC. And they stated unequivocally in that attempt that the FCC lacked the standing to do so. Mr. President, this is a solution that is really searching for a problem. And let me guarantee you, whatever anybody thinks the problem is right now, that will not be the problem 6 months from now, unless we would figure out how to slow down innovation in this area that suddenly we're dealing in a static environment instead of a dynamic environment. Even if there was a legal basis for this legislation, we still can't get away from the fact that it's a massive and unnecessary overreach into the private sector, which has thrived and even has thrived while our overall economy has slowed and stalled. In 2003, only 15% of Americans had access to broadband. According to the Commission's own national broadband plan, in the last year, 95% of Americans had access to broadband. 2003 to 2010, 15% to 95%. It sounds like to me that there's access is doing what you'd want it to do and is occurring how you'd want it to occur. Fixed and mobile broadband internet access, expanded and improved upon by the private sector, is the fastest growing technology in history. In only 7 years, 95% of Americans got to where 15% were 7 years earlier. Competition in this field is robust. Technology advances, network build-out, and infrastructure improvements are happening quickly to the tune of billions of dollars of investment and innovation and an ever-expanding array of applications for consumers. And more competition is on the way as providers make use of increased amounts of spectrum coming online and lay new networks of fiber to connect Americans in rural areas in the country. The telecommunications sector contributes more than $60 billion annually to our economy. Net neutrality would slow that down. Rather, the order that is set forth, the Commission begins to speculate on what might happen as opposed to what clearly is happening. First, the kind of anti-competitive action that the Commission seeks to remedy is already illegal. Second, the Commission in this space is far too fierce. Their rule is far too repressive. Most Americans already have two options for wired broadband access at home or at work, and the number of wireless competitors available is exponentially higher. No government has ever succeeded in mandating investment and innovation, and until this order, nothing has held back internet investment and innovation in this country, and that's why it's done so well. Broadband build-out is a thriving success story on which every American, virtually almost all Americans now count. And we now even take it for granted. It is incumbent on us to look at this rule, to understand the negative impact it will have on a thriving way to communicate, to do business, to talk to each other, and to reject this rule and let this system continue to develop with the same innovation, the same intensity, the same incredible success that it has in the past 7 years. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.